Mm. Okay, everybody, good afternoon. Please turn your cameras on if you're able to, and let's get today's class started. All right, everybody. So today is Tuesday the 22nd. How is everyone doing? Got a thumbs up. Got a good, cool. And that thumbs up. Very good, very good. Anybody have an interesting weekend that they want to help share with us a little bit about?
Honestly, just working on like exams. Like I have to still finish a 12-page paper.
So that sounds like quite a substantial assignment from Ferris.
Yeah, it's a first sociology exam. I'm currently on page 7, so progress.
So you're in the home stretch. You're past halfway. That's good.
Yeah.
I posted the review sheet. I think it was on Saturday, and I will post exam info tomorrow, my time. So when you wake up, it'll be there for you tomorrow. About how it's going to run, because it's a little bit different than normal. You'll have a 2-hour period to do the exam, but it's not going to be proctored. So I want to explain that in an email. So look for that tomorrow. And then on Friday in discussion sections, you're going to review the material for the exam with Devin. So please be sure and get as much as you can get done of your review sheets by then. And look at those essays. The essays are going to be, I've given you the 3 choices of which 2 will be on the exam. And you'll choose one of those 2. So there's no reason for you not to be prepared for the essays if you put the time in to do that.
I have a quick question about that. So for the study guide.
Yes, Ashley.
I wasn't really sure. So when it says identifications, like that section, is it going to be like short answers based on that? Or is there going to be multiple choice?
Good, yes, it'll be short answers. So you're going to try and put together a good ID has, I would say about like 5 or 6 sentences, sort of 8 true things that really identify the item, but also that tell us why it's historically important or historically significant. So try and get down the most important things about that and drive it home with why it matters for each of those IDs, and you will be at full credit.
And then for the short essay, how long would you expect that to be?
The short essay typically, is an intro and maybe like 3 paragraphs maybe, and a very brief conclusion. That's what I think it takes an average student to get that information across. You can do it in 2 probably, but I think 3 is a bit safer. So in terms of time, it's worth half the credit of the long essay. So, sort of do the math there and be sort of strategic about how you divide your time out for the short essay and the long essay.
So
and the long essay is about twice that.
Twice that, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so I'm going to get going with today's lecture. And today I asked you just to read half of chapter 7. This is a really eventful chapter, and it's also our last chapter before the exam. As I wanted to sort of slow down and have us sort of take some time and look at this chapter in depth. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint share with you all, and we're going to get going. So for last week, I asked you to do, for the class that I wasn't able to come to in person, I asked you to look at the Constitution and to respond to questions about that as a primary source. As you have noticed, I think the Constitution was a really big deal sort of was the culmination of the this new Meiji government's promises to the people of Japan, but also of the imperial system that was being put in place. Now, the emperor was in charge of Japan. It was he who handed the constitution. He promulgated it to the people of Japan. So, as we discussed, you know, as you read, there are a lot of articles that have to do with population of Japan and how the people of Japan are going to be changing in terms of the constitution and what that means for them. Lots of things are laid out that have not been laid out before, and these are influenced greatly by Western, both British and French law, but also by Prussian law, drawn upon these different constitutions to make this constitution, drafted by Ito Hirobumi and a scholar official named Inoue Kaoru. And these two figures, they put in the rule of law as an important element. Taxes are there, the draft is there, but also things like due process, no search and seizure without legal cause, property rights are inviolable. Very important elements, freedom of speech, association. We'll discuss how that doesn't actually work out, but this is what they promise, as well as freedom of religion, but it is there. So these kinds of things make Japan's people into a citizenry that now is sort of underneath, but also fully tied to the imperial government and the emperor at the top. So the people of Japan as a whole are going to go through so many changes. As I'm going through your essays, I can see that some of you are picking up on the changes that are happening in the 1860s, 1870s. Now we're getting to the end of the 19th century. I think a whole new round of changes is upon Japan. What we see is perhaps the most important change economically and population-wise, or for demographics, is industrialization. People are leaving all over Japan's rural zones and going towards the urban centers. This was not a new phenomenon, but the extent that it was happening was indeed very new and unprecedented. We see people attracted to industries that are in big cities, as well as lots of service and industries that are there as well. We see that Japan has focused very heavily on mining and metals and coal mining and these kinds of things to try and catch up to its Western sort of competitors, role models. And they do great at that. They import a lot of machinery from the United States, and they're able to boost coal and metal mining by 700% in the first decade. Japan's government also sort of allows for the formation of financial cliques, they call them, or zaibatsu. These are companies, some of which came from the have sort of carried over from the Edo period, some of which are new, like Mitsubishi, but all of which combine banking and a transport sort of wing and a trade wing and a mining wing and a manufacturing wing. And all these different pieces, they all work together and they collaborate and they communicate. And if the zaibatsu, as we'll discuss more I think in a couple of weeks, if one element, the banking, for example, is a holding company, and they, for example, might give favorable loan rates to other parts of the zaibatsu of that family or that company to allow them to invest more in a given technology. So it's very sort of consolidated way of functioning, and this is part of what allows Japan's companies to so successfully take on industry and become a global competitor in those realms. The government also sells its fledgling early railroads to private companies, of which there are a handful, and they expand it's a very capitalistic way, railroads all throughout Japan over the next 20 years. We also see that as Japan marches towards having a better defense system in place and having a standing conscript army and having the kinds of machinery necessary to use that army to protect itself, at the very least, if not also to act preemptively overseas in Japan's interest. We see an explosion of military production as well during the late 1800s. But Japan's most important industry, by and far, is textiles. In the late 1800s, Japan comes from sort of out of nowhere, right? And they bypass Egypt and India and China in terms of exporting textiles, of which silk and cotton are the most important. And this really just changes how Japan's place in the world dramatically sort of changes because of this industry. So I want to focus more today on this industry and how important it was and how it comes into being. So the government is pretty aware that silk is an area where Japan might be able to have a competitive advantage, and they decide to invest in that very heavily. They bring over machinery from France and from Great Britain, and they try them out and they choose the best ones, and then they mass produce these. And they begin with the first a model mill in Tomioka, which is actually in Gunma, not too far from Tokyo, in 1873. This mill is a mill that is sort of going to set the standard for mills in Japan and be a model for other government mills, hopefully, and later on, hopefully also mills. And so it's a very nice, modern, red brick building with lots of ventilation, room to circulate. And so the French advisors who come and who also advise the first factory managers on the equipment are very hands-on. And this is, it's a model project, as I said before. This map here, you can see Gunma is sort of here, just up here beyond Tokyo. And
Professor, I just want to
blueprint-
confirm whether you should be
Yeah.
sharing a screen right now, because at least for me, I'm not seeing a shared screen.
I'm seeing one.
I see one.
Okay,
I see
I
it
can
too.
see it.
okay, just a issue on my end.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm not. Okay. Okay, thanks, Devin. So this mill was created to showcase Japan's technological expertise and new expertise, and to sort of launch this industry. And so the government actually sent out recruiters at each prefecture, and who then also sent out recruiters at local levels to bring in sort of model women to come work in these factories. And they were supposed to come there and go out to other factories and then teach later on and create their own factories. 500 women were chosen, and the women were all chosen from the samurai class, almost all of them, for the industry of textiles. And it was pretty cushy, right? You may be able to see here, this is a picture of the mill before it was privatized and then shut down. Women are dressed in kimono. There's a lot of space, a lot of light also, as you can see here, a lot of air. So this is what the government hoped that in Japan, a factory would look like. We talked about the Iwakura Embassy. We talked about how they were exposed to a lot of the underside of industry in the West, right? And so Japan was hoping to counteract those kinds of trajectories by creating a much better system. But from 1879 or so, Japan's economy goes through a very difficult, I mean, it's already had some issues, but it goes through a very difficult phase. And to sort of put this, and this is in the book in more detail as well, but to make it sort of to simplify things, the Minister of Finance is watching as the government is basically about to go bankrupt and trying to find solutions, right? And so in 1881, he sets out to fix things with very sort of draconian measures, right, to fix the economy and save the government coffers. So he has the government decrease spending and puts in sort of measures of austerity. He raises taxes, which hurts people, as you can imagine. He also decreases the money supply. And I'm not very good with math or economics or money or any of that kind of stuff, but some of you probably could do a better job than me at explaining this. But what happens when you decrease the money supply in this way is it can lead to inflation. And so the smaller money supply and also attaching the currency to the silver standard, all these things, they work together to essentially make it harder for the average person in Japan to pay for things. Things actually, even though the inflation works for the government, people in Japan individually oftentimes are left in a difficult spot. And so what we have is the rural Japan that is losing population that's going towards the cities, is more solutions to make ends meet that go beyond what they have been able to sort of do traditionally to make ends meet. So, in agriculture, for example, we see that the prices, in fact, for goods drop. We see farmers then trying to get loans, which for the first decade of the Meiji period are actually quite available to sort of try and foster, their productivity. And we see very quickly that these farmers default on loans and that there are foreclosures. And to make things worse, there's several environmental issues, but one of which is the crop failure in 1884 that exacerbates the problem. So the economy actually is stabilized, but the farmers and the rural population as a whole are left in the lurch. So this is part of why the transition begins to happen amongst the people who fill the mills, from the elite samurai class women to those who really need money, and mills become a different kind of project. So in the Meiji period, more than half of the mill workforce, cotton and other textiles, are women. And they are coming mostly from these areas that are the most impacted by the economic policies of the Matsukata deflation. And the process is one I want to talk about very briefly. It is one in which a labor recruiter paid by the mill goes out and tries to find young girls, usually, to come work in mills. And then the girl's parents would sign a contract with the mill, essentially sort of selling her for a number of years to the mill. And then she would go to the mill and work. The contract would of course, pay a sum of money to the parents, who then are able to live or survive a bit better. But in exchange, the daughter then has to work in the mill and pay off that debt. And as we'll discuss, a lot of issues with that arise, making it impossible oftentimes to actually pay off that debt. Questions here. So is a system that was initially, right, supposed to be showing Japan's best, and was very paternalistic, right? That was the goal. And so what we have is the household system in which there is a patriarch in Japan who is the head of the household and who owes, through sort of Neo-Confucian norms, benevolence to those below, and who then expects in return loyalty and obedience. That system, they try to apply that and to sort of display that in the factories, which by the 1880s are going to almost all be privately owned. And therefore, a lot of these, the image of a government model, or the image of a sort of a well-meaning father figure looking over these girls who are working in factories, very quickly begins to dissipate. And so what really is not so great. A part of this I also want to mention is that the initial actually, into the 1910s, the rhetoric of factory work was that it was a temporary job for young girls to go and to sort of grow up, right, and to get experience making money, to get experience working outside the home, and also getting some education, so that they'll be better equipped for managing a household and getting married later on. All of this was, in fact, in their interest, right? But the reality was very different, especially because of the privatization process, which put the needs and desires of factory owners at the top, and well-being of factory. Yeah, so things were in fact not so great. Women had to work overtime, and this is true of men as well. But since we were most of the factory workers in this time period, they worked overtime the most. And this is hard work, difficult work that silk reeling requires you to put sort of balls of silk in the boiling water, and then to pull it out, and then to sort of make the thread, to pull the thread from the ball and begin to reel it. And this process, if you have small hands, it's great, but it is scalding hot water, right? So this is difficult labor, even before we talk about the machines and the dangers of the machines that are at work as well. So women had to work overtime in these hard conditions. And what we also see is that women were unhappy. They chose sometimes to go to the mill, sometimes their parents chose for them most of the time. But in many cases, we have a lot of information that women were very unhappy. This is actually a poem that one factory working young woman wrote. I want us to take a second and look at that. So please do that.
I have a question, Professor.
Okay, so let me just sort of get sort of the tone of this poem. If you could raise your hand, I can call on you. Let me call on somebody then. How about Lacey? Are you able to talk about the tone of this poem? All right. How about Orlando? Are you able to talk about the tone of this poem?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of sad almost. It's like the woman's kind of acting like, or talking about how she doesn't feel like human. It's like she's kind of being used as like just for labor.
Yeah, right. So first of all, it is indeed, it's very sad, right? And the fact that she feels dehumanized, right? That I think very much gets to the heart of this poem. A little bit angry, right? The part where she sort of talks about the dead trees and the mountains are blooming is her being sort of, she's trying to use some irony here and to sort of showcase her discontent. So this is a reality that the women of the factory women were forced to go through and were not happy about, but did so for economic or sometimes family-related economic reasons. They're also very crowded. What we have is a system in which factories don't get much larger, but the number of women working and machinery in the factories increases, right? And so we have increasingly crowded conditions, which, this is happening throughout the industrial world, and Japan is no different. This is also going to foster poor sanitary conditions in the factories, partially because women are oftentimes going to be sharing bedding with somebody who they switch shifts with. So you'll have a shift one person would sleep in the bed, when their shift is over, and then when they wake up, shift 2 person would go to sleep in that same bed. So this was not a good way to maintain good hygiene. And so what we see is that illness begins to really sort of propagate in the space of Japan's textile mills in particular. The most important of these illnesses is tuberculosis. And this is a scene from an anime that some of my students have seen before and talked about. I think it's called The Wind Also Rises, but it's a scene of a young girl who definitely has tuberculosis, which is a very terrible disease in which in the industrial world was very widespread. Tuberculosis essentially is a disease in which your pulmonary system ceases to function, and you begin then to cough up blood as the lungs inflate and then become diseased, and then you die. And this was transmitted through droplets in the air, but also it could be gotten from the kinds of really close, crowded, unsanitary conditions that were happening, and also the shared bedding in these factories. One of the issues that we may not see much of in the book, but that I want to highlight, is that the factory system, as you probably could tell from the poem, was not one that women enjoyed being a part of. And so women were unable to leave factories from the 1890s or so onwards on their own. Most factories had some sort of bars on the windows. Factories also had some sort of a control system, maybe like that would sort of block the egress from the building into the outer world. So we have, I'm not sure, next slide discuss this or not, but one of the things that one factory that I read about some years ago had a pretty common setup. It had an elevated walkway from the main entrance, which was of course locked, and then there was another door that was locked, and there was a wall. And so if one was to go out on this sort of catwalk, she still couldn't get out. And of course there was water beneath the catwalk. So there it was really a very difficult system to get out of and to go shopping, those kinds of things. Although on occasion when we're allowed in groups to go out under supervision and do some shopping. And there also was, of course, the dangers. I mentioned, the scalding hot water, but there also were lots of injuries that happened on the factory floor. And there also was the danger of male supervisors who took advantage of the young women working in factories. This is another poem by a different girl working in a factory. All right, so what is the tone of this poem?
Anger?
Anger. Okay, yeah. Who was that? I couldn't see who said that.
I'm sorry, Denny.
Oh, okay, Danny. Yeah, Danny. So the anger, right? Desire for revenge, and the doorkeeper is the person that she's talking about here, which I think speaks to the system of being confined, right, and unable to leave. And she shows cholera, which is another disease that is, at this point, coming and going in Japan. Not so much in factories, but definitely in the urban slums of Japan. I think also speaks to the kind of illnesses that were around at this time in Japan. Some of the worst stories that we have about factories closely confined when catastrophe strikes, when there were fires, for example, when we're oftentimes unable to leave, or at least leave easily. And so if that doorkeeper was not doing his job well, was not alert, then women would be left inside. The story of a fire in Aichi up in northern Japan, at this one such factory in the early hours of the morning. Women were locked inside and could not get out, and 31 died before the fire was contained enough to open it from the outside and let the women who were in the factory out. As I mentioned before, the men who were supervising women in factories were taking advantage of that situation often as well, and the girls sometimes wrote about that as well. One of the first sort of modern movements of protest in Japan was that of women, I should say, of industrial protest, was that of women trying to fight this system. We have women who began to go on strikes, and it would also lead boycotts of goods that were tied to the factory after 1885. There was about two of the demands were met in the first round of strikes in 1885, and then there were strikes very frequently after that. A major strike in 1886 was the Amamiya silk mill strike. This was a major strike for women in Japan. 100 women actually just tried to negotiate better conditions, at least stable, if not increased wages, and also a commitment from the management not to not let things continue to get worse in the factory itself, in terms of their safety and their crowded conditions. It took them only 4 days, and they didn't get extra wages, but they were able to get their hours stabilized. They're going to be increased, and they also were able to get promises about working conditions in other areas as well. So this was a sort of the beginning of perhaps women's industrial protest in Japan on a major scale, and we'll see more of these coming throughout the Meiji period and afterwards. But this was sort of the first that launched that movement. In Osaka, strike in 1889 was actually a larger strike a few years later than this at a cotton mill. And this one, we ended up with a longer strike that we have men actually joined with women as well. And what we see here is a lashing out at the lack of control that women have and that the workers have over bonuses and savings, which are typically just being taken away by management and applied to the interest basically that they have accrued on their initial contract loans or payments, I should say. So they're against that. They would like to also have higher wages, and this is another important strike that gets national attention in Japan's early newspapers. So I want to change gears and talk about another element, because I think that women really are, in fact, the driving force behind the Japan's rapid modernization, and they are some of the ones who are also on the front lines for the consequences and the negative consequences of that industrialization process. Another area in which women are being, I think, used pretty significantly is the area of prostitution. After textiles, this is the most frequent employer for women in Meiji Japan. It actually is somewhat similar in terms of the structure to the factory. It is a system in which a recruiter goes to villages and recruits young women from their families, and in the same way that the family would take a lump sum of money and then the daughter would pay it back to the factory out of her salary, the same is happening in the tea house, or the tea house where the prostitute has been sort of indentured, the brothel. So what we see is that as things continue to get worse and worse in northern Japan in particular, the area we call today the Tohoku, the northern part of Japan, so the northern Honshu, the same area that is hit by where we have nuclear reactors, where we have famine and blight and tsunami disasters, earthquake disasters, and just a lot of other issues as well. this area has already begun to suffer, from the consequences of industrialization in the late 1800s. So that is the area from which most prostitutes, more prostitutes come in Japan. And we see that families sell their daughters to make money, to get by, or that daughters knowingly sort of sacrifice themselves by selling themselves into prostitution to give money to their families. Oh, there we can see the Tohoku, which is in red here. Now, the government, the Meiji government does not want to stop prostitution because it sees it as a necessary evil, but also an area in which the sort of an equilibrium between proper society and improper society can be maintained. And also an area through which sort of the horrors of industrialization, the hardness of industrialization can be sort of softened for the men who need to go and seek sexual pleasure among prostitutes. So the government has to try and find a way to make this work. The West is watching what Japan is doing, and the U.S. in particular, with its sort of Christian imperialism and value system, is watching Japan's treatment of prostitution. Christians in Japan, Japanese and Westerners in Japan, are criticizing prostitution as a practice. So the government of Japan sort of compromises and creates a system in which prostitution is going to remain legal, but it's going to be sort of a better, more benevolent paternalistic system for the workers. So it separates prostitution from being a geisha in 1900, and it also mandates that a prostitute can leave work as a prostitute anytime that she wants to do so. As you can imagine, this does not always work out, but it's at least it's part of this new code for prostitution regulation in 1900. The brothel work only. So Article 7 is a set of stipulations that allow women only to work in brothels and not to be working alone as independent contractors on working on the street, to sort of try and remove prostitution from the public eye and therefore from the West's sort of constant gaze on Japan. We also see that Article 7 requires that prostitutes get permission to leave licensed quarter where prostitution is legal from the police. This article then is sort of the clear repudiation of the cessation guarantee, because a prostitute who cannot leave licensed quarter unless the police agrees to allow her to leave has to then get the policeman to give her permission, which he might not give because he doesn't know that she is trying to leave her tea house. So it was not a very effective system in that sense. But anyway, prostitution actually increases rather than decreases in the Meiji period until we have about 550 licensed areas in Japan in the 1920s. I'm going to show you a map here of the Yoshiwara, which is the area of Edo originally, where prostitution was practiced and was allowed. As you can see, it is a sort of closed special district and a planned district with a controlled entrance and exit system, as you can see here. And the practice of haramise, or women showing themselves to be looked at, was part of what Westerners were so surprised by, and men were definitely sort of attracted by this, and it exoticized Japan, but it also embarrassed the Japanese officials, and it drew the criticism of Western and Japanese vocal Christians and others who were against prostitution. So they wanted to get rid of that, and so this is part of what they're able to do. how do we say, is outlawed. Prostitutes have to now be inside and inside of a closed building. And another law the same year, 1900, will make it illegal to be a prostitute without a license, and it will make it illegal to be a prostitute without the license you obtain by going through a medical examination process, among other things. And so what we see is that the prostitution as a job or as a profession, it increases, and the government supervision and control over women's bodies also increases in this process. So again, women are just very much involved in industrialization and working both in the sex industry, but also in factories. Not sure you can see. How do we say that's not correct? How do we say 1916? And this sort of is as far as we get in Japan towards removing prostitution from the public eye. As I mentioned before, cessation does not actually work very well. Police oftentimes would encourage, sometimes forcefully, girls not to leave their contracts, and they were because of the requirement that the women get police permission to leave the license quarter. They were they could block that very easily. The debt women also owed to their tea house, their brothel, kept them attached to this, despite the fact that they should have had free cessation. And also a prostitute who tries to return to normal life did suffer a lot from social stigma. So it was not easy to stop being a prostitute in the Meiji period. This is the case actually up until World War II. So if we talk about women going to school and the rates of school attendance and literacy in Japan, they're very encouraging and even impressive, right? But if we look at the percentages of women who didn't go to school, and we compare those to the number of women who, trying to figure out who those women were, we come across, in fact, most of the women who belonged to that 2% had difficult circumstances, and prostitutes were actually quite numerous within that 2%. And prostitutes who had not finished all of their schooling were a large part of that as well. And so this myth of prostitution being a transition or a temporary thing is really shattered. Right? We see women who are unable because they haven't gotten enough education, and they have been unable to leave freely for enough time that they are unable then to move on and become members of society who are able to sort of function and live and be seen as normal. So what I want to do now is I want to take a second, and I'd like you just to ask you to take out your journal entries that I asked you to turn in. I'm going to stop the screen share here. Okay. And I just want to sort of talk for about 5 minutes or so about which persona that you all chose and sort of see what you came up with. From what I could see, there were quite a few of you who had done this, but that was a while ago, so I don't know. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind, as a class, if you could just tell me what your journal entry, who you were and what your entry was about, that would be really good. So I will sort of look around here. I see Ashley's hand. Yeah, tell us about your persona.
So I picked a female textile factory worker, and then
okay, nice.
And then I talked about how her and her sister worked at the factory together, but then her sister got sick with tuberculosis because of the terrible conditions in the dormitory. And then and then I talked about how her sister got sent home because her bosses were worried that they were gonna spread it to everybody else, and that a few weeks later a bunch of other girls in the dormitory got sick, and that she was scared she was gonna get sent home to have to work on the farm.
Okay, so lots of good context, right, about tuberculosis, about working conditions, about ties to the rural family back home. Yeah, that sounds like a really good one. Thank you for sharing that, Ashley. Who else wants to tell us who you chose to be and how life was for them in the Meiji period? Let's see, who can I see? How about Carrie? Are you there?
I also did a textile worker, but I only talked about like how like I left my family who was like a samurai family, and how there were other women that were committing suicide because of the mental taxing of working in the factory.
Okay, suicide. Yeah, that's also one of the options that was available to one was to commit suicide. That must have been hard to watch. Yeah, thank you for that, Carrie. Let's see. Shub, are you here?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Took the role of a teenage prostitute that was sold to the brothel by her parents, and how she actually wanted to study and become a politician or something like that, like bringing social reforms into place. But she couldn't do that because she had to pay she had to pay back the amount that took like 3 or 5 years, as it is mentioned in the readings. So how she's forced to do all this stuff, and how what she actually wants to do in life, and what she is facing like at her workplace.
Okay, so that I think that hits all the right points, right? The attachment to the tea house, the frustration, right, that she faces because she cannot realize other goals that she might have, and the sort of like the long term, right? She cannot the length of this attachment as well. I think is well put. Thank you for that. Let's see, who else is raising their hand to share? Will, yeah, Will Ash.
So I actually took the different perspective. I was the son of a wealthy trade merchant from Osaka who was in Tokyo looking to get the loan money back that the empire had taken from the Osaka trade organizations. And then I was talking about the utilization of the train and everything like that in the election.
Okay, so you were looking at sort of politics and money and trying to sort of get back what was taken from you when the government made this big transition, right? And took what was not theirs to take. Very cool. That's original. Thanks for that, William. Let's see. I think I see another hand here. How about Jack McDonough? And I'll probably have to stop after that.
So I took the view of like a farmer who was like participating in like the political practice for the first time. So like I talked about how I went like on the train and like saw all these technological like innovations, and then like went to Tokyo and saw like the liberal party's like events there and listened to all their speakers. And yeah.
Okay,
and then,
yeah. So you were really caught up sort of in the sort of the positive, or at least the political changes that are happening in the new transportation revolution happening in Japan, and also all the ways in which somebody might have been sort of moving from a rural to an urban existence. I like that a lot. Okay, well, I think we're going to stop there for today. Thank you all for that. and I will see you on Thursday, but I will put up exam instructions tomorrow and info on the exam tomorrow. So thank you all. Have a good afternoon, and I will see you Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Washington,
Yes, Naya.
for the exam, are we gonna have like all day on Sunday, or will it be that you have to turn it in? Will it be like a timed exam?
So it's the timed exam, but people who have, who I know, based on their DS information, need extra time. I can, discuss with them the possibilities of giving them a longer window to do the exam.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, sure. Do you have a question, Nam or Ferris? No? Okay, good. All right. So thanks, Devin, and have a good rest of your day. And I will talk to you on Thursday before class, if not before, if we need to before, if you need to talk about things for Friday.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. All right. Talk to you then.
Thanks, Devin.